The envelope arrived between the second and third round of gift opening. Lena Marsh was holding a tiny knitted hat, white with yellow ducks stitched along the brim, and she was laughing at something her cousin had said about the ducks looking drunk, when a man in a gray suit walked through the garden gate. He did not belong there. Everything about the baby shower was soft: pastels, ribbons, women in floral dresses holding sparkling cider, and this man looked like he had been cut from a different photograph entirely. Sharp jaw, no smile, a leather folder under his arm. 62 guests went quiet, not all at once. It happened in a wave, starting from the women nearest the gate and rolling backward like a slow tide, until even the caterer stopped arranging cupcakes and looked up. Lena's mother, Grace Hargrove, stood from her chair. "Can I help you?" The man did not look at Grace. He looked at Lena. "Mrs. Marsh? That's me." He held out the leather folder. "You've been served." Lena set the knitted hat on the table beside a tower of wrapped boxes. She took the folder. She opened it. She read the first line, and her vision did something strange, like the words were trying to swim off the page, and she blinked hard and read it again. Petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by Caleb Stone Marsh. Her husband had sent divorce papers to her baby shower. 62 women stared at her. Her mother's hand was on her arm, but Lena could not feel it. What she could feel was the baby kicking, a sharp, definite thump just below her ribs, as if the child had read the document too and had opinions. "Lena," Grace whispered. "Lena, sweetheart." Lena turned the page. She read the terms. She turned another page. She read those terms too. Grounds cited: irreconcilable differences, division of assets. His lawyers had already drafted the split. The penthouse would remain his. The car would remain his. She would receive a settlement, a generous one by most standards, enough to build a new life, they probably thought. They did not know she had already built one life from nothing. She could do it with her eyes shut. "Lena, sit down," Grace said, her voice catching. "Please sit down." Lena did not sit down. She closed the folder. She looked at the courier, who was already backing toward the gate, with the expression of a man who understood he had just detonated something. "Thank you," she said to him. Her voice was perfectly level, which made it worse. "Would you like a cupcake? They're lemon." The courier left without a cupcake. The party did not resume. How could it? 62 women had just watched a pregnant woman get served divorce papers beside a cake shaped like a rocking horse. Conversations started in low clusters. Phones appeared. Lena's cousin tried to take the folder, and Lena held it against her chest like it was the most precious thing she had ever received, which in a terrible way it was. Because Lena Marsh had been waiting for something to break. She just had not expected Caleb to break it first. Here is what 62 women at a baby shower in Connecticut did not know. They did not know that Lena Marsh was born Lena Hargrove. They did not know that Hargrove used to mean something. It used to be printed on the side of a glass building in downtown Boston, a tech company her father built from a rented garage and a borrowed server. Hargrove Systems, 1,400 employees, government contracts, a stock price that made analysts use words like meteoric. They did not know that 7 years ago, a man named Caleb Stone had looked at Hargrove Systems and seen a carcass worth picking clean. He had launched a hostile takeover so precise, so surgically brutal, that industry magazines wrote about it the way sports writers cover a knockout in the first round. He had bought the board. He had buried the patents in shell companies. He had walked away with everything that mattered and left the Hargrove family with a pile of legal fees and a father in a wheelchair. Philip Hargrove had his stroke 3 days after the final vote. He was 51 years old. He had built something real, something that employed people and made things that worked, and a man he had never met took it from him over the course of 6 weeks, using nothing but money and patience. Lena was 19. She had been studying art restoration at a small college in Rhode Island, the kind of place where students wore paint-stained jeans and ate ramen without irony. She came home for Thanksgiving and her mother was packing boxes. The house was already sold. Her father was in a rehab facility learning how to hold a fork again with his left hand because his right hand no longer listened to his brain. She did not go back to college that semester, or the next one. For 2 years, Lena Hargrove lived in a rented room above a laundromat in Somerville. She finished her degree online. She restored paintings in a borrowed studio, small jobs at first, chipped frames and water-damaged portraits nobody cared about. She was good at it. She was good at making broken things look whole again, which was ironic in ways she did not enjoy thinking about. She also spent those 2 years doing something else. She was collecting documents, emails, audit reports, board minutes. She had a contact inside the old company, a woman named Diane, who had been her father's assistant for 15 years, and who had copied certain files before her access was revoked. Diane gave Lena a flash drive at a coffee shop in Cambridge and told her to be careful. The flash drive contained evidence that Caleb Stone's acquisition of Hargrove Systems had not been merely aggressive, it had been fraudulent, doctored asset valuations, bribed auditors who had signed off on numbers they knew were fabricated, a shadow company in Delaware that existed solely to funnel money during the transition. The takeover was not just cruel, it was criminal. Lena kept the flash drive in a safety deposit box. She made 3 copies. She waited. She was 23 when she decided what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She was going to get close to Caleb Stone. She was going to gather enough evidence to bury him. And if that meant entering his world, learning his language, sitting at his table and smiling at his jokes, then she would do that too. She did not plan to marry him. That came later, and it complicated everything. She also did not plan to get pregnant. That came even later, and it ruined the plan entirely. But on the afternoon of the baby shower, standing in a garden in Connecticut with a folder of divorce papers pressed against her swollen belly, Lena felt something click into place. Not peace, not fury, something colder and more mechanical than either of those things, a gear that had been waiting to turn. Caleb had made the first move. He had drawn a line and told her which side she was standing on. He had made it simple. She set the folder on the gift table. She picked up the knitted hat with the drunk-looking ducks. She put it in her bag. "Mom," she said, "I need you to drive me home." "Which home?" Grace asked, and the question was not as simple as it sounded. "Mine," Lena said, "the one I'm about to build." Grace Hargrove had watched her daughter lose everything once and come back from it with a steadiness that scared her. She recognized the look on Lena's face now. It was the same look Lena had worn the night she packed her bags in Somerville and said she was moving to New York. The look that said, "I know exactly what I am about to do, and you are not going to like it, and I am going to do it anyway." They drove in silence. Lena sat in the passenger seat and watched the Connecticut woods blur past the window, and she thought about Caleb Stone Marsh, the man she had married, the man she had loved in spite of every plan, the man who had just thrown her away without the decency to do it in person. She thought about the safety deposit box in Boston. She thought about the 63 families who had lost their livelihoods when Hargrove Systems collapsed. She thought about her father, who still could not write his own name. And she thought about the baby, who kicked again, harder this time, like a small fist knocking on a door. Lena put her hand on her belly. "I know," she murmured. "We're almost there." She did not mean the house. She did not mean any house. She meant the place she had been walking toward for 7 years, one careful step at a time, and she could see it now, just over the ridge, and it looked like the truth about who Caleb Stone really was, the truth about who she was. And the truth about what happens when a man hands his wife the weapon she needed to destroy him and calls it a divorce. Grace pulled into the driveway of a small rental house on a street lined with maple trees. It was not the penthouse. Lena had rented this place 3 weeks ago, quietly, using cash, telling no one except her mother. A contingency, a foxhole. She had learned a long time ago that you always need a door that nobody else knows about. Inside, the house smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. 2 suitcases stood in the hallway. A folding chair sat in the empty living room next to a lamp on the floor. "You knew," Grace said, standing in the doorway. "You knew this was coming." Lena lowered herself into the folding chair, one hand bracing the armrest, the other cradling her belly. "I knew something was coming. I did not know it would be this stupid." Stupid? He sent a courier to a baby shower, Mom, in front of 60 people. That is not a legal strategy. That is a tantrum. Someone wound him up and pointed him at me, and he did not even stop to ask whether the story was true. Grace closed the door. She sat on the floor because there was nowhere else to sit. She looked at her daughter with an expression that was half admiration and half something much older, something that lived in the part of a mother's brain that never stops counting threats. "What story?" Grace asked. Lena stared at the bare wall across from her, a nail hole from a previous tenant's picture frame, a small crack in the plaster running diagonally like a river on a map. "Someone told him things about me," Lena said. "Lies. But the kind of lies that work because they sit close enough to the truth to smell real." "Who?" Lena almost smiled. Almost. "Vivienne Cross." Grace's expression changed. The name landed like a dropped glass. "She's back?" Grace whispered. "She never left," Lena said. "She was just waiting." Vivienne Cross. The name tasted like rust. Lena had known about Vivienne since before the wedding, since before the first date, since the moment she began researching Caleb Stone with the focus of a surgeon studying an X-ray. Vivienne was Caleb's ex-fiancée, old money, a smile like a closed fist. Her family had co-invested in the Hargrove acquisition. They had bankrolled the bribed auditors. They had made money on the collapse of everything Lena's father had built. And now Vivienne had whispered something in Caleb's ear, and Caleb had believed it, and a courier had walked through a garden gate and handed Lena the consequences. Lena reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. No calls from Caleb, no texts, nothing. He had outsourced the end of their marriage to a stranger in a gray suit and gone silent. She set the phone face down on the floor. "Mom, I need the box from Boston." Grace went very still. She knew which box. She had driven Lena to the bank the day she deposited the flash drive. She had waited in the car and had not asked questions, because some questions, once asked, cannot be unanswered. "Lena, are you sure?" "He served me papers at my baby shower." Lena's voice was quiet and even and absolutely certain. "He picked a fight with the wrong woman. He just does not know it yet." Grace nodded once. She stood up, brushed off her dress, and picked up her car keys from the counter. "I will be back tomorrow," Grace said. "Drive safe." Grace paused at the door. "Your father would be proud of you." Lena looked at the crack in the wall, the river going nowhere. "He would tell me to be smarter than I am angry." "And will you be?" Lena placed both hands on her belly. The baby was quiet now, resting maybe, gathering strength for what came next, the way Lena had gathered strength for 7 years, one document at a time, one swallowed rage at a time, one morning after another of waking up and choosing patience over fire. "I will be both," she said. Grace left. The house was silent. Lena sat in the folding chair and stared at the wall and began to plan. 3 years before the baby shower, before the marriage, before Caleb Stone became something more complicated than a target, Lena stood in a private gallery on the Upper East Side and held a damaged Klimt painting in her gloved hands. The painting was small, 18 inches by 12. A woman's face rendered in gold leaf and oil, her eyes half closed in an expression that could have been ecstasy or exhaustion or both. A water stain had bloomed across the lower right corner, softening the woman's chin into a bruise of faded color. Someone had stored this painting in a basement that flooded. Someone had not cared enough to save it. Lena cared. That was her job. She had spent 4 years building a reputation as one of the best young restorers on the East Coast, the kind of person collectors called when they wanted invisible work, when they wanted the damage erased without a trace. She was 26. She worked out of a rented studio in Brooklyn, and she had a waiting list. The woman who had hired her for this particular painting was named Ruth Stone. Lena knew exactly who Ruth Stone was. She had known before she accepted the job, before she returned the phone call, before she packed her restoration kit into the back of a taxi. Ruth Stone was Caleb Stone's mother, a retired art dealer who had spent 3 decades building one of the finest private collections in New England. A widow, a patron of the Metropolitan Museum, a woman whose name appeared on brass plaques in galleries across 4 states. Also, the mother of the man who had destroyed Lena's family. Lena had not sought this job. It had come to her through a chain of referrals so organic, so untraceable, that it almost felt like fate, if you believed in fate, which Lena did not. She believed in preparation. She believed in positioning herself in the right rooms until the right doors opened. She had spent 3 years restoring paintings for collectors in Caleb Stone's orbit. She had attended charity auctions where his name was on the program. She had built a career that was genuine and excellent, and also, underneath, a bridge leading directly to his front door. Ruth Stone's Klimt was that front door. Lena worked on the painting for 6 weeks. She came to Ruth's gallery 3 times a week, and Ruth sat with her every time, watching the careful chemistry of solvents and patience. Ruth asked questions, not about the painting, about Lena, where she grew up, what she studied, why she had chosen restoration over creation. "I like fixing things," Lena said, which was true in ways Ruth could not have imagined. Ruth was warm in a way that caught Lena off guard. She had expected cold. She had expected the kind of polished distance that wealthy people wore like perfume. Instead, Ruth brought her tea. Ruth told her stories about buying paintings in cramped Parisian apartments in the 1980s, about arguing with dealers who thought a woman could not tell a real Modigliani from a forgery. Ruth laughed with her whole body, shoulders shaking, eyes squeezed shut. Lena liked her. This was a problem. Liking Ruth Stone was not part of any plan. Lena had constructed a version of this operation in her head that was clean and mechanical. Get close, gather evidence, expose, walk away. Nowhere in that architecture was there room for genuine affection toward any member of the Stone family. But Ruth brought her tea, and Ruth asked about her parents, and Lena said her father was unwell and her mother was taking care of him, and Ruth touched her hand and said, "That is the hardest kind of love there is." Lena almost broke. Right there, in the gallery, holding a tiny brush loaded with gold pigment. She almost opened her mouth and said, "Your son put him in that wheelchair. Your son's money is why my mother sleeps on a fold-out couch in a rehab facility. Your son looked at my father's life's work and saw nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet, and he subtracted until there was nothing left." She did not say any of this. She touched up the Klimt's jawline and kept breathing. On the last day of the restoration, Ruth invited her to dinner. "Just family," Ruth said. "My son is in town. He would love to see the painting. He pretends not to care about art, but I catch him staring at things when he thinks no one is looking." Lena said yes. Of course she said yes. This was the door opening. This was the moment she had been building toward. She went home and changed into a dress that cost more than her first car, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and tried to find the woman who had lived above a laundromat and eaten cereal for dinner and sworn revenge on a man she had never met. That woman was still there. She was just wearing better shoes. The dinner was at Ruth's brownstone in the West Village. 6 people. Ruth, her sister, a family friend who collected ceramics, a couple who had something to do with a foundation, and Caleb. He was already seated when Lena arrived. The dining room had one of those long wooden tables that looked like they were stolen from a monastery, and Caleb was at the far end, reading something on his phone with his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. He did not look up when she entered. Ruth introduced her, and he raised his head, and Lena felt the room tilt sideways by about 3 degrees. She had seen photographs. She had studied his face in magazine profiles and news segments and SEC filings that happened to include headshots. She knew what he looked like. What she had not known was what it felt like to be in the same room as him, to be the thing his eyes settled on, to watch his expression shift from polite disinterest to something more alert, more focused, like a lens adjusting. He stood up. He shook her hand. His grip was firm without being performative. His palm was warm and dry, and she held it for exactly the right amount of time, and then let go and thought, "You ruined my family, and you do not even know my real name, and your handshake feels like a promise, and I hate myself for noticing that." "Mom says you saved her Klimt," Caleb said. His voice was lower than she expected, quiet for a man who was known for filling rooms. "The painting saved itself," Lena said. "I just cleaned up the damage." He looked at her for a beat too long, not in a way that was inappropriate, in a way that suggested he was trying to place her, to figure out why she seemed familiar, why her face triggered some distant recognition he could not quite reach. He would never reach it. Lena was 19 the last time their lives had intersected, and she had been a ghost even then. A name on a family tree he had not bothered to read, a girl standing in the background of a photograph he had never looked at. "Sit next to me," Ruth said to Lena, pulling out a chair, "and ignore my son when he starts talking about real estate. It is the conversational equivalent of watching paint dry." "I heard that," Caleb said. "You were meant to, darling." Dinner was roasted lamb and potatoes, and a salad with pears and walnuts, and a dressing that tasted like honey and mustard. Lena ate carefully. She drank one glass of wine. She answered questions about restoration and listened to the ceramics collector talk about glaze chemistry, and she laughed at Ruth's stories, and the entire time she was aware of Caleb at the end of the table, the way you are aware of a sound just below the range of hearing, a hum, a vibration in the air. He watched her, not obviously, he was good at subtlety, but she caught him 3 times, and the 3rd time he did not look away. After dinner, Ruth showed the group the restored Klimt. It hung in a hallway between the dining room and the library, lit by a single brass lamp. The gold leaf caught the light, and the woman's face glowed like she was breathing. Everyone murmured approval. Ruth squeezed Lena's arm. Caleb stood behind Lena, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and clean, and she thought about her father's hands, the left one that worked and the right one that curled into a useless fist, and she thought about standing very still and letting this man's proximity do its work, because proximity was the first step, and the first step was the hardest. "You're very good," Caleb said. "At what?" "At making things look like nothing ever went wrong." Lena turned to face him. He was closer than she had calculated. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the lamplight, and he was looking at her mouth, and she knew that look. She recognized it the way a hunter recognizes a trail, and she had 2 choices. She could step back and be professional and let the moment dissolve, or she could lean in. She leaned in, not physically. She held his gaze and let the silence stretch, and then she said, "Everything goes wrong eventually. The skill is knowing what's worth repairing." He smiled. It was not a charming smile. It was a real one, caught off guard, and it changed his entire face, made him look younger, made him look like someone who could be surprised by the world. Lena filed the smile away, evidence of a different kind. He asked for her number. She gave it to him. He called the next morning at 7:15, which was either eager or deliberate, and she suspected both. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Tribeca, where the tables were too close together and the wine was too expensive, and Caleb talked about buildings. Not in the way Ruth had warned about. He talked about old buildings, abandoned ones, the factories and warehouses and theaters that sat empty in cities all over the country, and his voice changed when he described them. It got softer, more careful. "Everyone sees a demolition site," he said. "I see what it was before anyone gave up on it." Lena put down her fork. She stared at him. Because that sentence, delivered without performance or self-awareness, was the most dangerous thing he had ever said to her. More dangerous than any acquisition. More dangerous than any legal filing. It made her think he might be a person, not a target, not a name on a list, a person who saw abandoned things and wanted to save them, and the irony of that, the brutal, inescapable irony, was that he had abandoned her father's company without a second thought. Unless he had not thought about it at all, unless it had been so routine, so mechanical, so completely devoid of human weight, that he had never once considered the people inside the numbers he was subtracting. That possibility was worse. That possibility meant he was not cruel. He was just careless. And carelessness, Lena had learned, does more damage than cruelty, because it does not even notice the wreckage it leaves behind. They went on 4 more dates, then 10, then she lost count. He read to his grandmother in Russian on Sunday afternoons. His grandmother, Nadia, was 91 and blind, and Caleb sat on a stool beside her chair and read Chekhov stories in a language Lena did not speak, and his voice in Russian was a completely different instrument, softer, rounder, full of sounds that seemed to come from a deeper part of his chest. Nadia held his hand while he read, and sometimes she fell asleep mid-sentence, and he kept reading anyway, quieter, as if the story mattered more than the audience. He left his shoes at the door of every room he entered. Every room. Lena asked him about it once, and he shrugged and said his mother had raised him that way, but Lena suspected it was something else, something that had to do with care, with the idea that you do not track your mess into other people's spaces. He touched her jaw when he kissed her, every time, his thumb along the line of her jawbone, like he was checking she was real, like he was memorizing the architecture of her face through his fingertips. She fell in love with him on a Tuesday in October. They were walking through Central Park and it was raining, and neither of them had an umbrella, and he took off his jacket and held it over her head, and she said, "Now you're getting wet," and he said, "I know," and kept walking. That was it. That was the moment. Not a grand gesture. Not a speech. A man getting wet in the rain because he did not want her to. Lena went home that night and stood in her studio surrounded by damaged paintings and cried for 30 minutes without stopping. She cried because she loved him. She cried because she was going to destroy him. She cried because those two things could not live in the same body without one of them dying, and she did not know which one she was willing to kill. The evidence stayed in the safety deposit box. The plan did not die, it just stopped breathing. 8 months later, Caleb proposed. On a rooftop, at sunset, with a ring that had belonged to Nadia, and Lena said yes, because she could not say no, because her mouth formed the word before her brain could intervene, because the woman who loved him was louder, in that moment, than the woman who wanted to end him. They married in a small ceremony at Ruth's brownstone. Lena wore ivory. Her mother sat in the second row and cried, and did not explain why. Grace had met Caleb 3 times by then. She found him polite, attentive, and completely unaware that his wife's maiden name should have triggered an alarm that would have brought his entire world crashing down. Lena Hargrove became Lena Marsh. She took her mother's maiden name. The distance between Hargrove and Marsh was 1 generation and a lifetime of deliberate forgetting. She moved into the penthouse. She hung paintings on the walls. She cooked dinner in a kitchen that was larger than the room she had rented above the laundromat. She sat across from Caleb at a table that cost more than her father's medical bills, and she loved him, and she kept the safety deposit box, and she waited for a reason to open it, or a reason to bury it. Neither reason came, so she built a quiet third option. She began moving money, not stealing. She wanted to be clear about that, even if only to herself. She was not stealing from Caleb Stone. She was redirecting, rerouting, taking money that sat in accounts so large they generated interest like weather and pointing it at people who had been standing in the rain for 7 years. The employees of Hargrove Systems, 63 families who had lost their incomes when the company was gutted, software engineers who had moved to smaller cities for cheaper rent, project managers who had taken jobs at retail chains, an accountant named Bernard Keene who had worked for her father for 20 years and now drove a school bus in New Hampshire because no one would hire a man whose previous employer had been publicly humiliated. Lena knew their names, all of them. She had a list. She had kept it since the year of the collapse, updating it quietly, tracking where they went, what happened to them, who recovered and who did not. Some had landed on their feet, many had not. The tech industry is not kind to people who spent a decade at a company that became a cautionary tale. She created a trust. She used a lawyer in Delaware, a woman named Fiona Blakely who specialized in anonymous charitable structures and who asked no questions that Lena did not want to answer. The trust was called the Hargrove Foundation, and on paper it looked like a standard employee relief fund established by a concerned third party. There was no direct connection to Lena. There was no direct connection to Caleb. The money came from household accounts. Caleb gave Lena access to everything: joint accounts, investment portfolios, a discretionary fund that refreshed monthly with an amount that most people would consider a yearly salary. He was generous in the way that very wealthy people are generous, which is to say, he did not think about money the way normal people think about money. He did not track it. He did not notice its movements the way he noticed the movements of real estate markets or the shifting weight of a deal in progress. Money, to Caleb, was a river. It flowed. It replenished. Monitoring its every tributary would have been like monitoring his own breathing. Lena monitored it for him, and she siphoned a fraction, a carefully calculated fraction, into the Hargrove Foundation every month. Over 18 months, the total reached just under $2 million. Enough to matter, not enough to trigger an audit. She thought of it as a correction, a recalibration. She was taking the money that had been made from the destruction of Hargrove systems and returning it to the people who had been destroyed. It was not justice. Justice would have required Caleb to know what he had done and to feel the weight of it, and he did neither. But it was something. It was a hand reaching down into the wreckage and pulling people up, even if the hand belonged to the wrecker's wife, and the wrecker had no idea it was happening. Bernard Keane received an anonymous grant of $40,000. He used it to go back to school. He sent a thank you letter to the foundation's post office box, handwritten on lined paper, and Lena read it at the kitchen counter while Caleb was on a conference call in the next room, and she held the letter with both hands and breathed through her nose and did not cry because she had used up her tears on more selfish things. This was the life she was living when Vivian Cross walked back into Caleb's orbit, like a comet, returning on a schedule only it understood. Lena first heard the name spoken aloud at a charity gala in March. She was 7 months pregnant and wearing a green dress that she liked and shoes that she hated because her feet had swollen to the size and temperament of angry bread rolls. Caleb was across the room, talking to a man in a blue suit, and Lena was standing near the bar, drinking sparkling water, when a woman she did not know leaned in and said, "I heard Vivian Cross is back from London." Lena kept her face still. "Oh? She was at the Whitfield opening last week. Asked about Caleb, apparently. Bold move, considering. Considering what?" The woman gave her a look that was meant to be sympathetic, but landed closer to hungry. "Considering they were engaged before you." Lena smiled. "I know about the engagement. Do you know about the rest?" Lena did not ask what the rest was. She did not need to. She had known about Vivian Cross since before the first date, since before the Klimt, since the early days of her research when she was mapping Caleb's life the way a cartographer maps coastline, measuring every inlet and shoal. Vivian Cross, daughter of Richard and Pamela Cross of the Greenwich Crosses. Old money, trust fund. A master's degree in art history that she had never used. Engaged to Caleb for 14 months, ending 3 years before Lena entered the picture. The engagement ended, officially, because of incompatible priorities. Vivian wanted to live in London. Caleb wanted to stay in New York, but Lena had dug deeper than the official story. Lena always dug deeper. The engagement ended because Caleb discovered that Vivian had been feeding insider information about his deals to a competing firm run by her uncle. Not enough to be criminal, enough to be a betrayal. Caleb cut her off, completely. No conversation, no negotiation. One conversation, 30 minutes, and then silence. That was how Caleb handled betrayal. He did not fight, he did not argue. He closed the door and walked away and never looked back. Lena knew this about him. She had factored it into every calculation. It was the thing that kept her up at night. Because if Caleb ever discovered who she really was, the door would close with the same definitive silence, and no amount of love or explanation or truth would open it again. But Vivian was back. And Vivian, unlike Lena, did not operate with patience or subtlety. Vivian operated with the blunt precision of someone who believed the world owed her things and was simply running late on delivery. The first contact came in April. Caleb mentioned, casually, over breakfast, that Vivian had reached out. An email. Something about a mutual investment opportunity. He said it the way you mention a piece of junk mail, without weight, without interest, already moving on to the next thing. Did you respond? Lena asked. I deleted it. She believed him. She had no reason not to. Caleb's honesty was one of the things that made him both trustworthy and terrifying, because a man who does not lie also does not forgive liars, and Lena's entire marriage was built on a foundation of silence that functioned exactly like a lie. The second contact came in May. Ruth mentioned that Vivian had attended a gallery opening in Chelsea. Ruth's tone was careful, diplomatic, the way people speak when they are trying not to say what they are actually thinking. She asked about you. Ruth told Lena over lunch. About how you and Caleb met. I told her the Klimt story. What did she say? She said it was sweet. Ruth paused. She said it in a way that made sweet sound like a diagnosis. The third contact was not a contact at all. It was a photograph. Someone texted it to Lena from an unknown number. No caption, no context, just a photo of Caleb and Vivian at a restaurant, seated across from each other, his hand on the table, her hand near his. The angle was deliberate. The composition was designed to imply intimacy. Lena stared at the photograph for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she checked the clock before and after. She studied Caleb's posture. His shoulders were angled slightly away from Vivian. His hand was on the table but flat, not reaching. His expression was polite but guarded. The expression he wore in business meetings when he was tolerating something he had not chosen. This was not a man having an affair. This was a man having a lunch he did not want to be at. But someone wanted Lena to believe otherwise. Someone had taken this photograph and sent it to her anonymously, and the purpose was not information. The purpose was erosion. Drip by drip, image by image, doubt by doubt, until the foundation cracked. Lena deleted the photograph. She did not mention it to Caleb. This was her mistake. One of several. Because while Lena was busy not mentioning things to Caleb, Vivian was very busy mentioning things to him. In June, Caleb came home late, not unusual. He worked late often, the kind of late that meant 11 o'clock and a tie thrown on the back of a chair and a scotch poured without sitting down. But this time he came home and stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at Lena with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Suspicion. Who's Fiona Blakely? He asked. Lena was in bed. She had a book open on her lap, a novel she was not reading, a prop for the appearance of calm. She looked up. I don't know, she said. She's listed as the trustee of something called the Hargrove Foundation. Your name is attached to it. Lena's heart did something that hearts are not supposed to do. It seemed to stop and race at the same time, like an engine that has lost its timing chain, all the pistons firing out of sequence. Where did you hear about that? She asked. Does it matter? Yes, it matters who is bringing you information about me, Caleb. He looked at her for a long time. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was calculating, assessing, running numbers on a situation the way he ran numbers on an acquisition. The money, he said, the transfers from the household accounts, where did they go? To a charitable trust. A charitable trust that uses the name Hargrove. Yes. And you did not think to mention this to me? I thought you would not care. You have never once asked me what I do with the discretionary accounts. I am asking now. Lena put the book down. She placed her hands on the blanket, flat, the way witnesses place their hands on Bibles, and she told him half the truth. She told him about the trust. She told him about the 63 families. She told him it was a charitable project she had been running quietly because she did not want credit or attention. She did not tell him why the families mattered. She did not tell him that Hargrove was her father's name. She did not tell him that the money was reparation, not charity, and that every dollar she moved was a tiny act of atonement, performed with his own funds for damage he did not know he had caused. Caleb listened. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "Why Hargrove?" he asked. "It's a family name, my mother's side." This was technically true. Hargrove was a family name, just not from her mother's side. Caleb nodded. He poured his scotch. He loosened his tie. He went to bed. But something had shifted. Lena could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The space between them, which had always been warm, had developed a thin layer of frost. Not cold enough to crack, cold enough to notice. Vivian had found the Hargrove foundation. Vivian had brought it to Caleb, and Vivian had added her own interpretation, her own narrative, her own carefully constructed version of events in which Lena was not a philanthropist but a thief, a con artist, a woman who had married a wealthy man and was quietly draining his accounts into a shell organization with a suspicious name. Lena knew this because she knew how Vivian operated. She had studied the woman the same way she had studied Caleb. Vivian did not attack directly. She planted seeds. She watered them with half-truths and concerned expressions, and the kind of questions that sound innocent until you realize they are guided missiles aimed at the foundation of a relationship. In July, Vivian told Caleb that Lena's pregnancy was not real. Lena was 8 months along. Her belly was the size and shape of a watermelon that had made ambitious life choices. Her ankles were swollen. Her back ached. She had been to every prenatal appointment, had ultrasound images pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lobster, had a nursery painted in pale yellow that Caleb himself had helped design. And Vivian Cross told Caleb the baby was not his. Lena did not know this at the time. She learned it later, after the baby shower, after the papers, after the world she had built inside the world she was trying to destroy, all came crashing down at the same time, like two buildings falling into each other. She learned it from Ruth, who had learned it from Caleb's lawyer, who had learned it from Caleb himself, in a meeting where Caleb sat in a leather chair and spoke in a voice so flat it scared the lawyer more than any shouting would have. Caleb believed Vivian, not because the evidence was strong. The evidence was terrible, a rumor, a suggestion, a question posed with the right amount of concern at the right moment, when Caleb was already unsettled by the Hargrove Foundation discovery. Vivian did not need proof. She needed timing. And Caleb believed her because of his mother, not Ruth, his father's second wife, a woman named Delia, who had married his father when Caleb was 14 and had spent 3 years systematically stealing from the family, forged signatures, hidden accounts, a fake charity that functioned as a personal fund. Delia had been charming and warm, and everyone had loved her, and she had been lying about everything for 36 months before Caleb himself, at 17, had found the discrepancies in the bank statements and confronted his father. His father did not believe him. Not at first. Love does that. It makes you defend the person you love against the evidence that the person you love is destroying you. It took another 4 months and a forensic accountant before the truth became undeniable. Caleb learned something from that experience. He learned that the people closest to you are the ones best positioned to betray you, and that love is the best camouflage a liar can wear. So when Vivian sat across from him at a restaurant, her hand near his on the table, and spoke with careful concern about inconsistencies in Lena's story, about money moving into strangely named trusts, about a pregnancy that seemed convenient, about a wife whose past was curiously thin, Caleb heard echoes. He heard Delia, and he reacted the way he always reacted to betrayal. He closed the door. He called his lawyers. He sent the papers. He did not investigate. He did not ask Lena. He did not run a background check on his own wife, which would have taken less than 48 hours and would have revealed the name Hargrove and the photograph and the entire impossible truth of what Lena was and why she was there, and the staggering, devastating fact that he had married the daughter of a man whose life he had dismantled without ever learning her face. He did none of this. He trusted his instincts. His instincts, shaped by a 17-year-old boy's trauma, told him to run. And he ran, straight into the worst decision of his life. The morning after the baby shower, Lena woke at 5 in the rental house and felt the baby pressing against her bladder with the determination of someone who had somewhere to be. She lay still for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, and let herself feel the full weight of her situation before she started moving pieces. Her phone had 17 missed calls, 11 from friends who had been at the shower, 3 from her cousin, 2 from numbers she did not recognize, 1 from Ruth Stone. She called Ruth first. Ruth answered on the second ring. Her voice was hoarse, the voice of a woman who had not slept, who had spent the night doing something that involved either crying or shouting or both. "I did not know," Ruth said. "Lena, I swear to you, I did not know he was going to do that. I believe you. He won't talk to me. He won't talk to anyone. His lawyers are handling everything, and he is locked in his office, and he has shut out the entire world, and I cannot reach him. Ruth, listen to me. I am listening. I need to tell you something, and once I tell you, everything between us changes. There is no going back from what I am about to say." Silence on the line. The kind of silence that has a texture, thick and heavy, the silence before a door opens onto a room you cannot leave. "My name is not Lena Marsh," she said. "It is not even Lena Volkova, which is what my passport says. My name is Lena Hargrove. My father is Philip Hargrove. Your son destroyed our company 7 years ago. I married him knowing who he was. I have been in your life, in your family, for 3 years, and I have been lying to you for every single second of it." Ruth did not speak for so long that Lena checked her phone to make sure the call was still connected. "The Klimt," Ruth finally said. "What about it? You were so careful with it. You held it like it mattered. I thought, this is a woman who understands that fragile things deserve gentleness." Ruth's voice cracked. "Was that a lie too?" "No. That was real. The painting was real. My work was real. My feelings for you were real. None of what I felt in your gallery was part of any plan. But marrying my son was." Lena closed her eyes. "Yes. And the baby? The baby was never part of any plan. The baby is the reason every plan fell apart." Ruth was quiet again. "Then, what are you going to do?" "I am going to hold a press conference." "When?" "Today. Today. Lena, you are 9 months pregnant." "I am aware. You cannot stand in front of cameras at 9 months pregnant and accuse my son of corporate fraud. The stress alone could put you in the hospital. Your son sent divorce papers to my baby shower." Ruth. "Stress and I are old friends." Ruth made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something much sadder. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I called because you deserve to hear it from me before you hear it from the news. You were kind to me. You brought me tea and told me stories and treated me like a daughter, and I cannot fix the fact that I was lying, but I can make sure you are not blindsided twice." "The money," Ruth said. "The Hargrove Foundation. That was for the employees, wasn't it? The ones Philip had to let go." "Yes. Vivian told Caleb you were stealing. Vivian told Caleb you were stealing. Most of them were designed to make him stop thinking and start reacting, and it worked." Ruth exhaled. It sounded like something deflating. Vivian's family. They were involved in the acquisition. Her father co-invested. Her uncle handled the audit. The bribery runs through their accounts as much as Caleb's. Another silence, longer this time. When Ruth spoke again, her voice had changed. It was harder, older. The voice of a woman who had spent 60 years navigating rooms full of people who lied beautifully. "Do you have proof?" "I have 7 years of proof, documents, emails, audit trails, enough to trigger federal investigations in 3 jurisdictions." "And you sat on this for 3 years while living in my son's house." "I did, because you fell in love with him." Lena pressed her palm against the wall of the rental house. The plaster was cool under her hand. She could feel a faint vibration from the street outside, cars passing, the world continuing its business while hers came apart at the seams. Falling in love with him was not part of any calculation, Lena said. It was the thing that broke every calculation I ever made. I had the evidence. I had the access. I had every reason and every opportunity to destroy him, and I could not do it because he reads Chekhov to his blind grandmother and takes his shoes off at every door and touches my face when he kisses me like he is afraid I might disappear. She stopped. Her voice had gotten tight and thin, the voice of someone walking a wire over a drop. But he chose Vivian's lies over our marriage, she continued. He chose to believe that I was a fraud without asking me a single question. He sent a stranger to humiliate me in front of 60 people. So the version of Caleb that I loved, the one who reads and removes his shoes and touches my jaw, that version apparently has limits, and the limits are exactly the same shape as his fear. Ruth said nothing for a while. Then, "What time is the press conference?" 2 o'clock. "I will be watching." "Ruth, you should know that once this goes public, Caleb's lawyers will try to discredit me. They will say I am a scorned wife. They will say I am mentally unstable. They will say I fabricated documents to extort a settlement. Let them say whatever they want. I raised my son to be better than this, and if he cannot face the truth of what he has done, then perhaps the truth needs to face him." The line went dead. Lena stared at her phone. She had expected anger. She had expected Ruth to defend her son, to choose blood over honesty, to slam the door the way Caleb slammed doors. Instead, Ruth had listened, had asked questions, had reached a conclusion, and had made a choice. The choice of a woman who valued truth over comfort. Lena wanted to cry. She did not have time. Grace arrived at 9 with the safety deposit box, a metal container the size of a shoebox, gray, unremarkable, the kind of thing you would walk past in a bank vault without a second glance. Inside, it was the flash drive. 3 copies, a folder of printed documents, a handwritten timeline that Lena had constructed over 4 years, mapping every fraudulent transaction, every bribed official, every shell company, every forged signature. She spent the next 3 hours organizing the materials. She sat at a folding table in the rental house and laid out the evidence in chronological order, and looking at it spread across the table was like looking at an autopsy of her father's life. Here was the moment the board voted. Here was the doctored valuation that made the deal possible. Here was the email from the auditor, confirming that the numbers had been adjusted. Here was the wire transfer to the Delaware Shell Company. Here was the letter from the bank that had facilitated the fraud. Each document was a bone. Together, they formed a skeleton. And the skeleton told a story that was very different from the one Caleb Stone told at dinner parties about smart business and calculated risk. At noon, Grace drove Lena to a hotel conference room that Fiona Blakely had booked under the foundation's name. Fiona met them in the lobby. She was a small woman with gray hair and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck, and she looked at Lena's belly and then at Lena's face and said, "Are you sure about this?" "I have never been more sure of anything. The Cross family will come after you. Let them. Caleb's lawyers are some of the most aggressive in the state. I know. I was married to their client." Fiona nodded. She held the door. The conference room had been set up with a podium and 12 folding chairs and a table for journalists. Lena had called 4 outlets. By the time she arrived, word had spread. There were 26 journalists in the room and 8 cameras and a sound engineer who was having trouble with a cable and kept crawling under the table with a roll of tape. Lena stood at the podium. She wore a black dress because black was the only color that felt right. The color of endings and beginnings. The color of the ink on the divorce papers. The color of the type on the documents she was about to make public. She did not start with her name. She started with the numbers. In 2019, Hargrove Systems was valued at $420 million by 3 independent firms, she said. Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this moment for 7 years. 6 weeks later, a 4th valuation was submitted that reduced that number to $190 million. That 4th valuation was performed by an auditing firm called Cross & Whitmore, whose principal partner was Martin Cross, uncle of Vivian Cross and brother-in-law of Richard Cross, who personally invested $32 million in the acquisition led by Caleb Stone. She let that sit. The room was very quiet. Pens moved on notebooks. Cameras hummed. The Cross and Whitmore valuation was fraudulent, Lena continued. The numbers were manufactured to justify a hostile takeover at a fraction of the company's true worth. I have the original audit working papers. I have emails between Martin Cross and Caleb Stone's financial team discussing how to adjust the optics. I have wire transfers showing payments from a Delaware shell company to 3 members of the Hargrove board who voted to approve the sale. I have 7 years of documentation, and I am going to make all of it available to every journalist in this room. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Can you identify yourself? Lena looked at the room. 26 faces, 8 cameras, a cable still being taped under a table. My name is Lena Hargrove, she said. Philip Hargrove is my father. I am also known as Lena Marsh. Until yesterday, I was married to Caleb Stone. The room made a sound, not a gasp, something lower, more guttural, the sound of 26 people recalibrating their understanding of reality at the same time. I married Caleb Stone knowing who he was, Lena said. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I entered that marriage with knowledge of what his company did to my family, and I stayed in that marriage for reasons that are complicated and personal and not relevant to the documents in front of you. Are you saying you married him for revenge? A reporter asked. I am saying that my motivations are less important than the evidence. The evidence shows that the Hargrove acquisition was conducted through fraud, bribery, and market manipulation. The evidence shows that the Cross family participated in and profited from that fraud. The evidence shows that 63 families lost their livelihoods because 3 men decided that a $400 million company was worth more to them dead than alive. She placed the folders on the podium. She stepped back. Take your time with the documents, she said. I am not going anywhere. The questions lasted 45 minutes. Lena answered every one. She answered them standing, 9 months pregnant, her back aching and her feet swollen and her hands steady on the podium. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not perform. She gave the facts the way she restored paintings, carefully, precisely, without adding anything that was not already there. At 3:15, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was not Caleb. It was Caleb's personal assistant, a young man named Oliver who had always been kind to her and who sounded, right now, like someone who was standing in the middle of a building that was on fire. Lena, Oliver said. He knows. Good. No, Lena, you don't understand. He pulled the old Hargrove files, the ones from the acquisition. There was a photograph in the folder, a company event, 2017. You're in it, standing next to your father. Lena closed her eyes. He's been staring at it for 20 minutes, Oliver said. He hasn't said a word. He hasn't moved. He is just sitting at his desk, staring at a photograph of a 19-year-old girl, and I have never seen him look like this, Lena. I am scared. Tell him to look at the jawline, Lena said. What? The girl in the photograph. Tell him to look at her jawline. He'll understand. She hung up. She placed her phone face down on the podium. She looked at the room full of journalists, and she realized that for the first time in 7 years, she was standing in public under her own name. Not Marsh, not Volkova, Hargrove. The name her father had built into something worth stealing. The name she had hidden like a weapon in a sheath, waiting for the right moment to draw it. The moment had come, and it did not feel like victory. It felt like surgery without anesthesia. Necessary, life-saving, and absolutely agonizing. Grace was waiting in the hallway. She took one look at Lena's face and opened her arms, and Lena walked into them and stood there, forehead against her mother's shoulder, and breathed. It's done, Lena said. No, baby, Grace said, holding her. It's just starting. The story hit the internet at 4:17 in the afternoon, and by 4:32 it had a name. The journalists called it the Hargrove fraud. Within an hour, The name was trending. Within 2 hours, financial analysts were pulling the original SEC filings and confirming that the numbers Lena had presented did not match the numbers Caleb's team had submitted. Within 3 hours, a former employee of Cross and Whitmore posted a thread online saying he had been pressured to alter the audit and had been fired when he refused. His name was Andrew Ferris, and he had been 24 years old at the time, a junior associate with a student loan and a lease on a studio apartment, and his refusal had cost him his career and his reputation, and he had spent the last 7 years wondering if the truth would ever come out. It was coming out now. It was coming out like a dam breaking, like water that had been held back for too long and had built up enough pressure to move stone. Caleb Stone released no statement. His lawyers released a statement, which is a different thing. It was 3 paragraphs of careful language that acknowledged the allegations without admitting fault and promised a thorough internal review while characterizing Lena's press conference as the unfortunate actions of a party engaged in contentious divorce proceedings. The statement did not mention that the party in question was 9 months pregnant with Caleb's child. It did not mention that the party had been served divorce papers at her own baby shower. It did not mention the word Hargrove at all, which was remarkable, because every journalist in the country had figured out the connection in under an hour, and Caleb's lawyers were pretending it was not there. Vivian Cross released a statement too. Hers was shorter. She denied all involvement. She characterized Lena's accusations as defamatory. She said she was consulting with her legal team. By the following morning, Vivian's uncle Martin had retained a criminal defense attorney. This was reported by 3 separate outlets. You do not retain a criminal defense attorney when you have done nothing wrong. You retain a criminal defense attorney when you have done something specific and are worried about who else knows about it. The dominoes fell with a speed that surprised even Lena. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry within 48 hours. 2 board members who had received payments through the Delaware Shell Company hired separate lawyers, which meant they were each preparing to blame the other, which meant cooperation agreements were coming, which meant plea deals were coming, which meant testimony was coming. Lena watched it all from the rental house. She sat in the folding chair with her laptop on a cushion on her belly, and she read every article and every filing and every public document, and she felt something she had not felt in 7 years. Tired. She felt tired. Not satisfied. Not vindicated. Not triumphant. Tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and will not be fixed by sleep, because it is not about rest. It is about the energy it takes to hold a secret for 7 years and then let it go and watch it take on a life of its own and realize that once the truth is out, you cannot control it anymore. It belongs to the journalists now, the lawyers, the public. The story is no longer yours. Lena had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In the laundromat apartment, in the Brooklyn studio, in the penthouse kitchen while Caleb slept. She had imagined what it would feel like to finally show the world what had been done to her family. She had not imagined that it would feel like grief. On the 3rd day, Caleb came. He did not call first. He did not send Oliver or a lawyer or a courier in a gray suit. He came himself. He pulled up in front of the rental house in a car that cost more than the house and sat in it for 11 minutes before getting out. Lena knew because she watched from the window. She counted the minutes the way she counted everything, precisely, because precision was the only thing she had left that she could control. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked terrible, the kind of terrible that happens when a person has not slept in 72 hours and has spent those hours understanding that every assumption they held about their life was wrong. His shirt was wrinkled. He had not shaved. His eyes were red and his jaw was set, and he was holding a manila folder against his chest, the way Lena had held the divorce papers at the baby shower, like a shield, like a wound. "Can I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. He walked past her and into the living room, which still had only the folding chair and the lamp on the floor and a stack of boxes that Grace had brought over. He looked at the room and something moved across his face, fast, too fast to catch, but Lena thought it might have been shame. "There's only one chair," she said. He sat on the floor. He crossed his legs, and placed the manila folder in his lap, and looked up at her. And for a moment, he looked so much like a man who had lost everything that Lena had to remind herself that he was a man who had taken everything first. She sat in the folding chair. They were at different levels, her above, him below. Neither of them mentioned it, but both of them felt it. The geometry of the room had become a statement. Caleb opened the manila folder. Inside it was the Hargrove acquisition file, the original, 53 pages of financial documents, legal filings, board minutes, and correspondence. And on top of the stack, paper clipped to the cover sheet, was the photograph. Lena at 19. Standing at a company event in a room full of engineers and project managers and executives. Her father beside her in a wheelchair, her mother behind them both, one hand on Philip's shoulder. Lena was in the back of the frame, half hidden by a taller man's shoulder. She was wearing a blue dress that she had bought at a thrift store for $9, and she was smiling, but the smile was thin, the smile of someone who was attending their father's last public appearance as the head of a company that no longer belonged to him, and who knew that by the end of the week the building behind her would have a different name on it. Caleb set the photograph on the floor between them. He did not look at it. He looked at Lena. "I looked at your jaw," he said. "In the photograph. The girl's jaw. It is the same jaw I touch every time I kiss you." Lena said nothing. Caleb opened the acquisition file. He turned to the first page. And then, in a voice that was low and flat and stripped of every ounce of authority he had ever carried, he began to read. He read every page, every number, every memo, every email. He read the doctored valuation aloud, and when he reached the section where the numbers had been altered, he stopped and pointed at the discrepancy and said, "This was changed. The original figure was crossed out, and the new one was entered in a different font. I did not notice this. My team did not flag it. I signed off on numbers that were fabricated, and I did not know." He turned the page. He kept reading. He read the correspondence between his financial advisor and Martin Cross, discussing the adjustment of optics. He read the wire transfer records for the Delaware Shell Company. He read the minutes from the board meeting where 3 bribed directors had voted to approve the sale. It took over an hour. Lena did not interrupt. She did not help him. She did not fill silences, or provide context, or soften the edges of what he was reading. She let him sit on the floor of a rental house and read the full truth of what his ambition had made possible. When he finished, he closed the folder. He placed it on the floor. He sat with his hands on his knees, and his head bowed, and he was quiet for so long that Lena could hear the clock in the kitchen ticking, and a dog barking 2 streets over, and the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. "I did not know the numbers were doctored," he said. "I believe you." He looked up. "You do? I have spent 3 years watching you. The way you work, the way you read contracts, the way you check numbers. You are thorough, obsessive even. You would not have knowingly signed off on a fraudulent valuation. You did not commit the fraud. You benefited from it. You built an empire on the back of it. But you did not plan it. That does not make it better. No, it does not. Your father. Yes. The wheelchair. Yes." Caleb pressed his palms against his eyes. He stayed like that, face hidden, shoulders curved forward, a man trying to fold himself small enough to fit inside the space between what he thought he was and what he had actually done. "I took everything from you," he said. "Yes. And then you married me." "Yes. Why?" The question sat between them like a stone in a river. Lena could feel the baby pressing against her ribs. A kick, then another. Impatient. Urgent. As if the child knew that this was the moment its parents would either find a way forward or confirm that there was no forward to find. "I married you because I was going to destroy you," Lena said. "I was going to gather evidence and expose the fraud and watch your company burn. That was the plan. That was the only plan." "What happened to the plan?" "You happened. You reading Chekhov to Nadia. You taking your shoes off at doors. You holding your jacket over my head in the rain. You happened to the plan, and the plan could not survive you. So you stayed. I stayed. I kept the evidence. I did not use it. I moved money into the foundation instead, because it was the only way I could help the people your acquisition had hurt without detonating everything. I found a middle path, a quiet one. And then Vivian found the path and blew it up. Caleb's face changed. The mention of Vivian did something to him. It sharpened something behind his eyes, turned something soft into something edged. She told me the baby wasn't mine, he said. I know. She told me you were stealing from me. I know. She told me your past didn't add up, that you were hiding something. She said she had a contact who could dig into your history and find the truth. And you believed her. I believed her because I was 17 years old once, and my stepmother stole everything we had using the same playbook: love, trust, access. And by the time anyone noticed, the damage was done. Vivian knew that story. She used it. Lena nodded. She understood. She had always understood. Caleb's reaction had never been about evidence. It had been about pattern recognition. His brain had matched Lena to Delia, matched the Hargrove Foundation to Delia's fake charity, matched the secrecy to the years of lies, and once the pattern locked in, no amount of evidence could unlock it. Only a bigger pattern could displace it, and the bigger pattern was the one Lena had just given the world. "Did you love me?" he asked, "or was I the job?" The question he had been carrying in that manila folder the whole way here. The question underneath every other question. Lena looked at him, at his wrinkled shirt and his unshaven face, and his red eyes, and his hands on his knees, and the folder on the floor between them, and the photograph of a 19-year-old girl who had stood in the back of a room and watched her father lose everything. She opened her mouth to answer. Her water broke. It happened the way these things happen, with a sensation that is nothing like the movies. Not a dramatic rush, but a slow, warm spreading that takes a second to register, and then registers all at once. Lena looked down. The folding chair, her dress, the floor. "Lena," Caleb said. "I know." "The baby." "I know, Caleb." He was on his feet in a way that she had never seen him move, fast and purposeful and completely focused. He reached for her arm. She let him take it. They walked to the door together, his hand under her elbow, her weight shifting against him with every step. In the car, on the way to the hospital, neither of them spoke. Caleb drove the way he did everything, precisely, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. Lena sat in the passenger seat and breathed through contractions that came in waves, each one tighter than the last, and she watched the road, and she did not think about the press conference or the SEC or Vivian Cross or the photograph of a girl in a blue dress. She thought about the question he had asked. Did you love me, or was I the job? The answer was both. The answer had always been both. She had come for the job and stayed for the love, and the two had grown into each other like tree roots under a sidewalk, lifting and cracking the surface, impossible to separate without destroying everything above. The hospital was white and bright and smelled like antiseptic, and someone at the front desk asked for her insurance card, and Lena almost laughed because the insurance was under Marsh, and Marsh was a lie, and Hargrove was the truth, and none of it mattered because the baby was coming regardless of what name was on the card. They put her in a room. A nurse attached monitors. Caleb stood in the corner and then sat in a chair, and then stood again, and then moved to the hallway, and then came back. He could not be still. He had spent 3 days learning that his entire life was built on a fraud he did not commit, but did not prevent, and that the woman he had married was the daughter of his greatest casualty, and now that woman was having his child, and he did not know where to put his hands. Ruth arrived at 7. She came through the door of the hospital room like weather, quick and inevitable, carrying a bag and wearing a coat she had not bothered to button. She looked at Caleb, she looked at Lena, she looked at the monitor tracking contractions. She did not say a word to either of them. She pulled a chair into the doorway, not inside the room, and not in the hallway, but exactly in the threshold, and she sat down and pulled a ball of yellow yarn from her bag and began to knit. Caleb stared at her. "Mom, what are you doing?" Knitting. In the doorway. In the doorway. She did not explain. She did not need to. Her positioning was her statement. She was between them, between mother and father, between Hargrove and Stone, between the past and whatever came next. She was not choosing a side. She was holding the space between sides, which is a harder thing to do, and a braver one. Lena gripped the rails of the hospital bed and breathed through it, and at one point, she looked at Caleb, who was sitting in the chair by the window, and he was looking at his hands, and she thought about all the things those hands had signed, the acquisitions and the contracts and the divorce papers, and she thought about the way those hands touched her jaw, and she could not reconcile the two things, and she stopped trying. At 4:12 in the morning, the baby was born. A girl, 6 pounds 9 ounces, dark hair, a face so new that it looked unfinished, still deciding what it was going to be, still composing itself from the raw material of two people who had done terrible and beautiful things to each other. The nurse placed her on Lena's chest. The baby made a sound, not a cry, more like a statement, a declaration of arrival, and Lena held her and felt the heat of her and smelled the top of her head and everything she had carried for 7 years, every plan and every rage and every document and every sleepless night, all of it went very quiet. Not gone, not resolved, quiet, the way a storm goes quiet at the center, the eye where the wind pauses and the sky opens, and for one single moment, the world is still. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Lena looked at Caleb. He was standing now, at the foot of the bed, and his face was doing something she had never seen it do before, something that was beyond any expression she had catalogued in 3 years of studying him. It was open, completely open, unguarded, the face of a man who was looking at his daughter and realizing that every wall he had ever built, every door he had ever closed, every instinct he had ever trusted, had led him to this room, and he did not know whether he deserved to be here. "Hargrove," Lena said. "Hargrove Stone." The nurse wrote it down. Caleb did not object. He stared at the name on the clipboard and his jaw tightened and something passed behind his eyes that might have been understanding. Both names, both bloodlines, both debts. Ruth sat in the doorway and knitted and said nothing. Caleb stepped forward. He reached out. His fingers hesitated above the baby's head, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her scalp, not quite touching. "Can I?" he asked. Lena looked at him, at his hand hovering above their daughter, at the distance between his fingers and the baby's hair, a distance that measured maybe 2 inches, and also measured 7 years, and a hostile takeover, and a fake name, and a marriage built on a foundation that was both a lie and the truest thing either of them had ever done. "You can try," she said. He touched his daughter's head, gently. The way you touch something you are afraid of breaking. The way you touch something you have already broken and are hoping will let you hold it anyway. The baby opened her eyes, dark, new, looking at nothing and everything at the same time. Ruth's knitting needles clicked in the doorway. The door was not open. The door was not closed. Outside the hospital window, the sun was starting to rise, turning the sky the color of something that had not yet decided what it was going to become. Lena held her daughter. Caleb held his hand on his daughter's head. Ruth knitted between them. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The silence held them the way water holds swimmers, buoyant and inescapable, and in that silence lived every question that had not been answered, and every answer that had not been given, and every possibility that still existed because no one had closed the door. Not yet. Not yet.